Greetings to all my comic book aficionados. This is Dante D bringing you all another video. And the topic for today's video will be underrated comic books. I went into my own personal collection here and I fished out 15 comic books that I felt are significantly underrated and really should be worth more monetarily or remembered more in comic book history. Originally, I wanted to keep this list only at 10. We're going to do a little bit of a countdown, and I wanted this countdown to be only 10 comic books originally, but I really had a hard time keeping it at just 10, so here we are with 15. In order to have made this list, the comic books had to have not been extremely popular at any point, really, and they can't be worth a whole lot of money. These books here are all great with respect to their story value and their art value. So enjoy the list. Here we go. So starting in at number 15, first underrated comic here will be Indiana Jones number 1. So this is a series called The Further Adventures of Indiana Jones, and these are all new original stories. These are not based off of the movies. They don't use any of the storylines from the movies. They're all original stories. And I have to say, this is one great series. It's a lot of fun. The arcs usually don't last more than 1 or 2 issues. I think at most their arcs lasted 2 issues, if my memory serves me correctly. But the stories here, they're just a lot of fun. Really enjoyable read. You really can't go wrong with this book. And they're super, super cheap. I picked this up quite a few years ago, but once I looked on eBay not too long ago, and this book still is not very, very expensive. Ran for only about maybe 30 something issues. I don't have every single issue, but I have most of them, and I can't tell you how much I love this book. It's really great, and you need to have this in your collection. Definitely a must for any Indiana Jones fan, but even if you're just a comic fan in general, you need to have this book. Marvel did make a movie edition kind of like they made like a comic book adaptation of, I think, Raiders of the Lost Ark and a couple other ones. I think it was just Raiders of the Lost Ark now that I think of it. But yeah, I actually prefer this because when it comes to like movie adaptations into comic books, I'll just watch the movie, right? These are all original stories and they're great. You need to have it. And I'll shut up now about this book and move on to the next one. So the next book that we have on the list, coming in at number 14, is a 1980s book, just like the Indiana Jones book. The Indiana Jones book was an early 1980s book. This is a later 1980s book, which, if you're new to comics, you likely have not heard of this book. But if you've been in it, I mean, even if you've been in comics, you might not have heard of this. I mean, I've been in comics for a little bit now, and I had never heard of this title. It's called AntMan, the Ultimate Ninja. There's a little bit of a story actually behind this book. A few years back, we're looking probably now five years back, maybe now. I bought a huge lot and I got a stupid deal on it. It was like a lot of like 1,000 comics from this guy's personal collection that he didn't want. He had 1,000 comic books. A lot of them were from the 80s, 90s, things that really are not valuable to collectors. So I got 1,000 comics for $100. It was great. I loved it. I went through this lot. It took me days to go through this lot and just kind of pick what I wanted and what I didn't want. This, believe it or not, was actually in the pile of books that I didn't want. What I ended up doing was I packaged them up, and I actually put these books. I have the first 6 issues, and I put the first 6 issues on eBay. It was up on eBay for months. I did not get one hit, no one interested, nothing. Like, they were on eBay for months. And I thought, finally, you know what? I'm just going to accept defeat. I'm just going to keep the book. So I kind of just put it in a box and forgot about them. Then I was going through this box one day, probably about a few months ago, and I found this book again. I'm like, you know what? I'll give it a try. And to tell you the truth, this ended up being a really, really good book. It was a lot of fun. Kind of reminded me a little bit of those 1980s action flicks, those flicks that are really well known in the 80s. You know, with like Arnold Schwarzenegger, Van Damme, Dolph Lundgren, all those guys there. Kind of has that same feel. A lot of fun. Kind of deals a lot with like the struggles with the Soviet Union at the time. One thing about this, even though it's published by Marvel, I believe that it does not take place in the same universe. It's kind of a separate universe, from the Marvel universe. And I think probably this book would have done a little bit better if they would have integrated some of the Marvel Universe characters into this same universe, or vice versa. But yeah, I mean, nevertheless, this was still a hugely enjoyable book. Really liked it, and I would definitely recommend it for your collection. You could probably, if you're lucky, find this in a bargain bin if you really want to check it out. Like I said, definitely should be a lot more popular and a lot more hyped about. I think anyway, it was a lot of fun to read. The next book on the list, coming in at number 13, was, I believe, hyped about at one point, maybe a little bit, but I don't think it was hugely popular. It's actually it's Sleepwalker number 1. And the reason why I decided to include this on the list, even though it might have been hyped about a little bit at one time, is because in the 90s, any new comic book that was released was hyped about. You know, everyone was looking for that new number 1 that was going to make them rich, right? So I think Sleepwalker was no exception to this. For those of you that were a little bit more aware during the 90s, I was really little in the 90s, and I think at the time this comic book came out, I was maybe 5 or something. But was this book hugely popular? I don't know. But I picked this book up, first 20 issues, and I got it for really cheap. It was $20. Really, really great book. A lot of fun. Really kind of a really fun story, and really kind of original too. I thought this was a really original character. I'm really surprised that he didn't become a lot more popular than he was. I think this guy was really the product of the 90s profiteering that was going on with comics, and the speculation. So people really kind of bought him a lot. Maybe weren't really reading him, just wanted this issue just to kind of as an investment. And when they were realizing that this book was not going up in value, they kind of just abandoned the character. I know Marvel canceled a lot of books after that big comic book crash, and I think he was one of them. But again, Sleepwalker number 1, and I mean, I think I've read maybe first 10 issues, and I love it. It's great. Not tired of it, and we'll keep reading it, and I'm excited to keep reading these other ones. So pick this one up. Don't think it's too expensive. Like I said, I got the first 20 issues in like literally beautiful condition, near mint condition, for like $20. Next book, coming in at number 12, we have Man-Thing number 1. I decided to include this one just because I think this one is more of a cult classic. You know, Man-Thing never really became super mainstream, but he kind of developed like a cult following. And this is just a great book. If you are really hell-bent on just reading superhero comics, like, you know, cape, cowl, tights and everything, I would really kind of challenge you to venture beyond that and take a look at this book if you're going to give any other book a try, because it is super good. I love it. I think I'm 5 issues in with this one, and looking forward to reading the other ones. I got this one in a lot. This one here is a little finicky, though. I got it pretty cheap. I think I got the first 20 issues or so for about $50, $60, and that was only maybe about a year ago. But, I mean, there are people out there trying to sell this for a lot of money, because if I'm not mistaken, I believe this is the first Man-Thing in his own series, if I'm not mistaken. This is not the first appearance of Man-Thing, I know that for sure, but I believe it is the first Man-Thing in his own series. There's also, I believe, Howard Duck. Howard Duck was also in this issue too, if I'm not mistaken. Might be the first appearance of Howard Duck. I don't know. I'm not sure. I don't remember now. But I know Howard Duck is involved with this issue somehow. So leave it, if you know, leave it in the comments. Let me know. But anyway, yeah, Man-Thing. You got to check this book out. Really great. Coming in at number 11 is Nova. This is a character that is, I think, slowly increasing in popularity. But I just can't believe it's taken this much time for this character to increase in popularity. And I think the only reason why this character is increasing popularity so much now is because I believe there is talk about a Nova movie coming out soon. But anyway, Nova, this is a really great series. This is Nova number 1 from the 1970s. I believe it debuted in 1976. If my memory serves me correctly. Great book. They kind of try to do a little bit of the whole Spider-Man thing with him. You could really see they try to capitalize on Spider-Man with this book because the character is really kind of nerdy. He's a teenager, first off. He's nerdy. He doesn't fit in at school. He's not popular with the ladies. And then all of a sudden he gets these superpowers, and that changes his life. But it's really interesting because it doesn't change his life in the way that you would think, kind of like it does Peter Parker's. With Peter Parker initially is somewhat good at what he does as a superhero. This guy gets superpowers, and he's exactly a really realistic representation of what a really big dork would be like with superpowers. Not good at it, can't stop crime. So far, I'm only 5 issues in, but so far he can't stop crime worth crap. He's just really a bad superhero, and I think that's what's great about him because it's a really realistic representation of what a teenage nerd outcast would be like if he got superpowers. But you know what? Marvel they didn't make any apologies about the whole relation to Spider-Man thing here. At the top it says, in the marvelous tradition of Spider-Man. I don't know if you could see that there, but they knew we have to make another character like Peter Parker because they really wanted to capitalize on that. So take a look at Nova. Great book, loved it, and I don't believe I spent too much on this book. I believe I got the first 20 issues again for around $60. So, but again, be careful because there's talk of a movie and the prices may be going up on this book. So be careful. But I'm pretty sure you should still be able to get a deal on this book if you want it. The next book that we have on the list has appeared in some of my other videos, so this won't be new to you, and that is Shadow of the Bat, number 1. Great book, 1990s book, but I can't stress enough how much I love Shadow of the Bat. I've said this before in some of my other videos, but in the 1990s, Batman is a character that has stayed consistently good. Like, I don't think there was one Batman story that I have read coming out of the 1990s that I didn't like. I like everything Batman from the 1990s. It's just fantastic. This book is no exception. Little tidbit about this book: this is actually the first appearance of Victor Zsasz, and let me tell you, this book is super cheap. These things are a dime a dozen. I actually have 2 of them, as you can see here. But when I bought this on eBay, I think I bought the first 7 issues or something. The first 7 issues of this book came with actually 3 copies of this, and I think I got the first 7 issues probably for something like $7. Super cheap book, but just because it's cheap does not mean it's not good. Super great book. You need it. Again, first appearance of Victor Zsasz. I don't know how this isn't worth a little bit more. I think it's because likely there's just so many of them floating around, but the fact that this is the first appearance of Victor Zsasz definitely makes it worth to have in your collection, and the fact that it just has a great story is another reason you need it in your collection, and it's super cheap. You literally cannot go wrong with this book. So if you don't have it, you need to get it. Okay, for the next book, coming in at number 9, another book that has appeared in some of my other videos is Thing, number 1. This is the first solo Thing series, and super great. I don't know how this book was not more popular. It came out in the early 1980s, and it's just a wonderful book. Thing is such a complex and interesting character because, unlike all of the other members of the Fantastic Four, he's visually deformed, right? And he sees his powers as a huge curse. And you really kind of get more into the psyche of Ben Grimm, and you really kind of learn a little bit more about his earlier life and his humble upbringings in New York. Great book. It's just super great. It's really kind of more of a compelling read too. And again, it's not super expensive. You should be able to add this book to your collection for not too much money. I know I picked it up, but again, I picked it up a few years ago. Like you're talking maybe 5 years ago, I picked this book up, and it probably only cost me like $15 for the first 10 issues or so. So see if you can get this book. You should be able still to get it at a relatively decent price. Number 8. This is a book that this particular issue is pretty popular, but I think the series as a whole, and that is Ghost Rider. I think the series Ghost Rider as a whole is really underrated. This particular issue, this is Ghost Rider number 1, so I know this issue here is relatively popular. I mean, this one book here is worth a little bit of money, but if my memory serves me correctly, there are only 2 Ghost Rider books that I can think of that are worth a lot of money, and that's this one here and Marvel Spotlight number 5, which is the first appearance of Ghost Rider. And the reason why this one's worth a little bit more is just because it's the first solo Ghost Rider series, and it's a number 1, right? But this series, I mean, aside from this book, the other books in the series are super cheap. This book started off, I think, in the 1970s. It's a 1970s book. I mean, Ghost Rider kind of trudged through the 70s and through the 80s. It really was not popular. I think it was eventually canceled at some point in the 80s. I read some reviews about older comics, and one person wrote, Ghost Rider was the comic that you bought if every other comic that you normally read was sold out and you still had some extra money. Like, it just, it was not a highly revered book, but I don't know why. I mean, the Ghost Rider series, in my opinion, was great. I loved it, and it's really great to have in your collection. I know there were movies made about it, probably not the greatest movies, with Nicolas Cage, and a lot of people didn't like them. I liked the first one, not the second one, but just a side note there. But yeah, you really can't go wrong with Ghost Rider. He's a great character, and the stories and throughout the whole series I found were really enjoyable. So check it out. You should. This again, this one issue is a little bit more is a little pricier, but the rest of the series, probably from 2 and on, shouldn't be too bad. Coming in at number 7, we have Legends of the Dark Knight. Probably one of the best Batman series ever. This book, in my opinion, is a little underrated just because, again, this came out in the 1990s at the height of the comic book boom. The DC was doing what other publishers were doing, releasing multiple covers. They have like the blue cover, red cover, red. I have the yellow one. There are all these different covers. They're just trying to capitalize on the whole number 1 thing. And then you got the little message down here: the first solo Batman book since 1940. Again, that's all superficial stuff to me, but the stories, I have to say, this series here needs to be in your collection. Again, these are super cheap. You should be able to get these in your bargain bin for 50 cents, $1. I got this really cheap. I actually got the first story arc, which I think was 5 issues, for $5 at my local comic book store even. So really good. In my opinion, some of the best Batman stories ever written have come in out of this series here. You really got to check it out. Super good. Coming in at number 6 is probably, this has to be one of my favorite books from the later 1980s, and that is XFactor number 1 in the whole XFactor series in general. This for me is really underrated. Now, I know this book has gotten a little bit of attention just because the first appearance of Apocalypse was in XFactor 4 and 5, and but other than that, I mean, I think the book has kind of been ignored. I know this had a little bit of a cult following. I know there are a lot of people, there are a few people out there that are diehard X Factor fans. I'm one of them. I love X Factor. It's super great. The story is amazing. So this book here, for those of you that know a little bit about the X-Men, or that don't know whole lot about the X-Men in the comics, in the 80s, the main X-Men series kind of, they didn't include those characters that we all know and love, like, you know, like Beast and Jean Grey and Cyclops and Iceman and Angel and all those the original X-Men. So those guys in the 80s kind of disappeared, maybe went to different teams. Jean Grey actually died in the 70s, but they bring her back in this book, but they unite kind of all of those classic X-Men characters again in X Factor, and it's just great. I love it. You can't go wrong with this book, and it's super cheap. Again, X Factor #1 you should be able to get in a bargain bin. If not, it'll be super cheap. The only issues of X Factor I know that will for sure be expensive will be X Factor 4 and 5, because those are the Apocalypse issues. But other than that, you should be able to get every other issue of X Factor for super cheap. So gotta have this in your collection. It's a must-have. I think it's just super. So X Factor #1. Coming in at number 5, we have Alpha Flight #1. This is an early 1980s book, which I believe is significantly underrated. Again, this is probably one of my favorite books from the 1980s. You really need to add this to your collection. They were kind of meant to be a Canadian version of the X-Men, and the stories are really compelling. I really enjoyed Alpha Flight, just a lot of fun. They have some nice longer arcs as well, but yeah, I love Alpha Flight. Give it a shot. You won't be disappointed. And this book, not too expensive. You should be able to get it added to your collection very cheaply. Next, coming in at number 4, we have the New Mutants #1. Now what you're going to say. You're going to say, Dante, New Mutants was hugely popular. It was at one point, but I think New Mutants was only popular near the end of its tenure. And that's when Cable and Deadpool were making their first appearances in New Mutants. So I know New Mutants ended with issue 101, I believe it was, issue 101. Deadpool appeared in New Mutants 98. Cable was in New Mutants 87 or something like that. But other than that, I think this series here was not hugely loved. It was only once Rob Liefeld joined the creative team that New Mutants really kicked off, and that was again towards the end of its run, right? So, but the early issues of New Mutants were not really hugely popular. I mean, it was popular enough to keep it in print, but never rose to the same heights as some of Marvel's other A-list books like Spider-Man or X-Men or Avengers. But yeah, you really need to add this book to your collection. It's super good. I love it. Professor Charles Xavier takes on a new team of younger mutants to train and become new X-Men, basically, and it's just a lot of fun. I loved it. Plan to read it again. I've read most of the issues already, and plan to read it again at some point. And it's just great and super cheap. Actually, I have two issues of it, or 2 copies of it, and it's great. I'm not sure how much it's going for right now, but again, isn't a hugely expensive book to add to your collection. Okay, we are down to our top 3. Coming in at number 3 is a book you likely have not heard of, and if you have, I'm very impressed. I had actually never heard of this book either. I just kind of stumbled upon it at the bottom of a bin of this comic book store that just had dozens and dozens of back issues, and that's Skull the Slayer. This book here is a book that was released in the 1970s, I believe in the mid-1970s, and it is something else. I loved it. Only lasted 7 issues. I believe this is a Marv Wolfman created character, and we all know that Marv Wolfman was a heavy hitter in the 1970s. See, I think what happened with this book was Marv Wolfman initially started writing this book out. Then I think his schedule just became too demanding, and he passed over the reins to another creator, and didn't do so well after that. Again, it was canceled with issue 7. But just because it was canceled after 7 issues does not mean it's not good. I find this book super entertaining. I absolutely loved it. So this guy is actually a Vietnam veteran, and he's going on trial for the murder of his brother, which he didn't do on purpose, but he's going on trial for the murder of his brother, and they were transporting him in a plane, and they fly over the Bermuda Triangle, and the Bermuda Triangle sucks them up and launches them back in time, and they're stuck back in time, but they're able to kind of, I won't tell you how, but they kind of are able to go through other periods in time as well, and it's just a lot of fun. I loved it. Just super fun. So pick it up. I actually found in the comic book store, I found issues 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Couldn't find the issue 1, but I actually managed to find issue 1 at Midtown Comics for $5. So this book was not too expensive. You should be able to get it super cheap. I don't know how this has not gotten more attention. I believe it's pretty rare too. I mean, I've never before finding it, I had never heard of it. It was never talked about. But yeah, that's Skull the Slayer. Coming in at number 2 is a book that you may have read, but if you didn't read it, you likely may have not even heard of it, and that is Talon. This is the most recent book that I have on the list. And the reason why I put this at number 2 is because it's freaking awesome. It is amazing. This, in my opinion, and I know a lot of people out there are going to disagree with me, but in my opinion, this series here was just as good as, okay, maybe not just as good, but really, really close in quality, in terms of quality, to the Court of Owls run by Scott Snyder. This is a character that was created by Scott Snyder. We all know that Scott Snyder created the Talon. After the huge success of the Court of Owls run in Batman, DC decided to give the Talon his own book, or sorry, a Talon, his own book, because we know that there are many Talons, right? But yeah, so they decided to give the Talon a series, and it was great. Scott Snyder originally started writing the book, and afterwards James, I don't know how to say that last name. Is it Tinian or Tinian, or I have no idea how to say it. James Tinian the Fourth. I don't know how to say that last name. I'm sorry, but he's actually a great writer. I know DC uses him in a lot of different titles, but great story. I loved it. You need to have this book in your collection. This book was actually canceled after, I think, 17 or so issues. I think it was canceled around issue 17. And I was super pissed. I was so mad when they canceled this book because I loved it, and it was great. I have every single issue, read it right to the end. You should be able to get probably every single issue for a rather low price, because I don't think it was a hugely popular book. But this, for me, is one of the most underrated books ever. I love it. You have to get this book. You will love it. I'm telling you. If you liked Batman, The Court of Owls, I'm pretty sure you will like this as well. If you pick this book up, you read it, let me know how you liked it. And last on this list, coming in at number 1, is The Defenders. We've all heard of The Defenders, but I don't know if everyone kind of holds this book in super high regard. I personally do. I think this is likely one of the best comics coming out of the 1970s. This particular issue debuted in I think it was in 1972 or 1973, and Defenders ran through all of the 70s and most of the 80s. I guarantee you, if you go to your comic book store right now and they have a bargain bin, you will find Defenders books in there. I have quite. I don't have. I have a lot of random scattered issues of the Defenders, some runs, and I can tell you every single scattered random issue of the Defenders that I have, I've purchased from a bargain bin for $1. This is the only Defenders book, being Defenders #1. This is Defenders #1. This is the only book that I've spent more than $1 on, and I think this issue here, it's a lower grade. It's not in super high grade. I think it's probably more of a G plus, VG minus. I don't know. I'm not huge into grading, but it's still an aesthetically pleasing book. And I got this book for probably about $30. Did not spend a huge amount of money on it, but great title. I actually, if you read top comics, even search top comics of the 1970s online, I'm sure this book will be mentioned. The writing is very compelling. It's really great. I don't know how it didn't get more attention or more respect, but it's great, and it needs to be in your collection. So there you have it, the top 15 most underrated comics, in my opinion. Did you agree with some of my selections here? What other books do you feel are really underrated? Let me know in the comments, and let's start a conversation on it. Until next time, this is Dante D signing off. Ciao.